State in Syracuse. And I have a new postdoc, but she's out of the office right now. She's only been there for a week, so I can't tell you too much about her. She seems very nice and hardworking, but we don't have a lot of to go on. And I was a faculty member here for a number of years, but I did my postdoctoral work at UNC in 2 different labs, immunology lab and virology lab, before I eventually took a job here. So basically, whatever you guys want to ask me, have questions, I typed a couple things up. I thought I'd just share some things. They're just very informal. If you have questions, I'll gladly answer questions. I know the most things you probably want is how to get a job, but I think there's a lot more to being a postdoc than that. And I think there's a lot of things that I don't know if you guys always realize when you take a position. And so I sort of had some things, I guess, as a faculty member and as having been a postdoc, the sort of things that I guess, at least for me, that I think have cropped up. In the big picture sense, I think you should enjoy being a postdoc. It's the best time as a scientist. As a student, it's very regimented. You have hurdles, you take classes, you have to do seminars. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's just things you have to do. As a postdoc, you just have to do research and you work in the lab. As a faculty member, you stop doing research and you have to worry about grants and you have to worry about people in your lab and accounting and management and teaching and everything else. So at least for me, I can speak, postdoc was the best time as a scientist. You come in, you do your work, you don't have to worry about getting the funding. I mean, you can get your own grants and we can talk about that. But in a big picture sense, you have someone over you who, in theory, gets the grants and you just have to go to work. And so I always thought that was a great time, and I enjoyed it. Ultimately, it does come to an end. You eventually have to get a job, assuming that's something you're looking forward to. And what I've sort of broken down is just sort of some of the things, what, as a postdoc, as a mentor and as a postdoc, what should you do? And again, these are just some ideas. I just spent a couple of minutes typing some things up. And things that I think both the mentor should remember and you know, any employee is that we're all people. And I know sometimes you get in there and you think everyone's perfect, so to speak, or maybe it goes both ways, I know that. But if you're working for a good lab and a good person, remember they are a person, they make mistakes, and they're, in a lot of cases, are learning to work with you as a trainee as much as you are learning to work with them, did I get that right, as a trainer. And so, again, not everyone is good. I know that I work for very different people as opposed to like the first guy. It was a bad experience. Although I took the positives, I learned a lot about science. He was a bad mentor, and I didn't get along with him, and neither did really anyone else. But nevertheless, I learned a lot about science. In fact, I'm still working on monocytes, and that's where I learned human monocytes is from him. Even though he's a bad mentor, I took the positive of science and I learned the virology. The next guy I worked for, who was just a delight to work for, taught me independence, how to write grants, everything else. I mean, I did a lot more on my own, but nevertheless, so I got sort of the best of both worlds. I learned the good and the bad taught me what, at least I hope, what not to do with people. A couple things, again, keep in mind, remember it is the mentor's laboratory. Whether you like it or not, it is their laboratory, and whether you might think they're running into the ground, unfortunately, it's their right to do that. I'm not trying to be funny, because hopefully you're working for a good mentor, but ultimately that person runs the lab, and you have to respect that. Again, for good or bad. But I think the big thing to think about is remember that you, as the trainee, particularly as a postdoc, you're in the same boat with the mentor. Your success and their success are tied together. And if you work as a team, again, these are just my opinions and what I hopefully try to do in my lab, it's much better. I understand there are people that do not work as teams, that they treat trainees as, I don't know, cattle. Your job is to get in, just do stuff, and that's all they want. They don't care about anything else, and you know, that is what it is. But in general, I think if in the labs that I think work well, that if you both remember, and this goes to mentor and trainee, as a postdoc or even a student, you're in the boat together, and success is tied together. I mean, if you're not working well in a standpoint of science, their grants may suffer, and equally, if they're not working well with you, grants can suffer. And if you work together, I think it can work very well. I mean, I can speak for Gary in my lab. You know, I was transitioning from the first grant I had, and I got a competitive renewal done, but he played a big role in getting the data we needed to get that grant refunded. And so, at least in my case, you know, it truly, I mean, it's true in all cases that you're in a boat together, and that his success was tied to mine. Ultimately, he had good success by working hard, helped me. I, in turn, obviously helped him, and he's got a job now. Again, I also want to sort of keep in mind that as the mentor and as a postdoc, you want to keep communication open. I think it's critical, and again, these are my experiences. I won't say it works for everyone, but in my experience, talking to your mentor about, and I have a whole more things down here we'll talk about, but talk to them about what you want. What do you want out of your job? What do you want out of your career? What do you even want out of the experiments you're doing? You know, in the context, and we'll, I guess I'll cover that over here, you know, keep the lines, you know, in that, what is the training that you want? I mean, as a mentor, my goal is to teach and give you, if you are training in my lab, the opportunity to write papers. You may be good at it, you may be bad at it, but I want you to do it, and even if I have to rewrite it, I will give you the first opportunity. It's very clear some are better at it, some are worse. I want to give people opportunity to give talks. I mean, all my trainees, whether students or postdocs, have gone to talks all where our meetings have been, and they've been, for the most part, in locations, at least in the US and Europe. We haven't unfortunately had any meetings, at least the CMV and the IHW in Asia yet, but they've been in Europe and the US and Canada. And we've given people an opportunity, I've tried to give an opportunity to give talks, to go to meetings, and again, part of the communication of what you as a trainee or as a postdoc wants to do is, what do you want out of it? At least in my case, with Gary, he wanted to be a faculty member, and so one of my goals was to teach him what it's like being a faculty member in the context of, you have to train people, you have to work with people. The people in your lab are the people in your lab, and there's good and bad to that. I mean, and all of you have seen students, some are good, some are bad, some are good but are challenging to work with, and all of those things are elements that you have to learn to work with, and you have to be prepared to work with that. Excuse me. Obviously, if you don't want to be a faculty member, talking to your mentor, also what are pointing you in directions of alternative careers. Now, some of us, myself, I've obviously gone the classic pathway to graduate work as a postdoc, and then I became a faculty member. But I certainly am aware and have plenty of people who went to other meetings, or went to other careers. My brother-in-law has a PhD, got it from Duke, and got a law degree. And he's a patent lawyer. In fact, the first student I had that graduated did a postdoc, got a PhD in my lab, did a postdoc out in a very big lab out in Oregon Health Science University, did a great job, gotten papers in the top, the cell type paper journals, and decided he wanted to go work as a scientific officer in a law firm that does intellectual property, and they're going to send him back to law school. So he is going to do sort of patent law and intellectual property. I have a student that went right from my lab to scientific writing. So there's a lot of different things. He's works for a medical writing company. I have Gary obviously went the classic academic route. I have a student who's working at UNC as a postdoc. She's looking for a faculty position in a small teaching college. So there are multiple different things to do. And one hopes that the mentor talks to you and you talk to the mentor. And that's sort of what I have some of the ideas, again, as you, I put on this thing as responsibilities. I don't know if responsibilities, but things I think you should take, at least think about. Again, this is something as a mentor member, you're a person and you're trying hard. At least I think most people are. I mean, you all know sometimes there's a bad egg. It just is the reality, whether you're going to work with a student, you're going to be a mentor, whatever, that sometimes happens. But I think in most cases they're good. And as I brought up in the mentor side, it is the mentor's laboratory, and you have to respect that, because, they can fire you. Equally, you can walk. That's the benefit of being a postdoc as a student, where you're stuck. For the most part, you're stuck in that lab, you graduate, you have rights as a postdoc, you can leave if you don't like it, but equally, unfortunately, you can be fired. But like I said, that you should realize that, but that's not an overriding thing. But there are, I mean, you've seen cases here where that has come up. But the big thing I want really to think about is, this is your career. You need to take, as I wrote here, to take the bull by the horn. What is it that you want? I mean, some people might be happy working in the lab till the day that mentor retires. You've got a PhD, you want to be a lab manager, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you need to be able to explain to your mentor that's what you want to do, and you have to accept. There's, like with everything, there's good and bad to that. If you want to be a postdoc in a faculty position, work with your mentor on those issues. And I think this is probably, from a standpoint of being a postdoc, obviously working hard in the lab is clearly the overriding thing, but ultimately understanding what is it you want out of your job as a trainee, as a postdoc, will help, I think, in almost all cases, the mentor think about how they can work with you. In the sense that you want to be an academic professor. You need to be able to write grants. You need to be able to do things. Can they help you? Can they see your grants? If you're never just going to go to industry, you may not care about that. Doesn't mean you're not interested in helping them get their grants funded by working hard, but you may not care about writing a grant. If you're going to be a lab manager, you may not care about, for example, presenting in seminars, in going to meetings and presenting. I'm not saying you don't want to travel, but that may not be an overriding thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you have to take the bull by the horn and communicate with your mentor, and hopefully the mentors work with you, saying, what do you want out of it? Do you want to be a professor? Do you want to not be a professor? I don't know. That's an okay thing to say, but you should at least be able to communicate that with them, because you need to know what you want to learn. I mean, maybe you don't ever want to write a paper. If it's like, I don't want to do it, I'll give you the data, you tell me what to do, you write it up. Fair enough. If you want to learn to write a paper, at least in my lab, I make them write a paper, and even if it comes back with the red pen, and they'll tell you it looks like someone died with the amount of ink on there, but we go through it and do it better, even if it takes 50 drafts. And I can tell you I have people that are not native English speakers in my lab, they've written papers, not very good, and we go 50 drafts, by the time the end is good, and I guarantee the second, third, and fourth paper gets better and better, and they've learned how to write scientifically, and at least if they're not a native English speaker, in a language that's not, you didn't grow up learning. And there's two things you're learning. Learning scientifically is not even native English speakers, most of them don't know how to write scientifically. They can write, a piece of paper. So it's hard, but if that's what you want to learn, ask your mentor if you can do that. Some do, some don't. I don't know how each person works, and everyone has a different lab, but these are things that I think you need to, take a stand on, or at least take the initiative on. Contrary to probably most mentors are not mind readers, and so they just don't know. And some get so busy, they're not excluding you or not trying not to help you, they're just busy. I mean, I can speak for myself. I'm in study section now. I've organized national meetings. I travel a lot. I've been invited to a lot of seminars. And there's times I come in and go, man, I don't know what people are doing. Not because I don't want to meet them. I meet them on a regular basis. But sometimes you get so busy, you got to focus on a crisis. You're doing, I have to get this grant. I got 10 grants on my desk from NIH. These got to be done at the end of the month. I'm doing nothing but review grants all month. And if there's something going on, knock on my door or chat, and that's what one thing I want you guys to think about in that. Again, you have to remember you got to respect that person and do it obviously always easy in a polite way, but I don't know anyone who wouldn't be like, hey, I want to write a paper. Sweet. And that's a lot easier than me writing it, And as someone who wants to train, I don't mind writing and going through and telling people. Everyone in my lab can tell you, we sit down and we circle paragraphs, say what's good and bad. I give them papers they've looked at. I help them write grants and stuff. So these are all things I think that you, as a postdoctoral fellow, or in any case, whatever fellow you are, as a fellow, as a scientist fellow, I guess I see there, you've got to take those things by the heart. You've got to take the initiative. And I think it meshes with, thinking about your future goals. What do you want to do in your postdoctoral experience? And really, based on what you want, how can the mentor, the lab environment mesh with yours and make it fruitful in the context, getting papers out, benefit to them, benefit to you. I mean, if it's a lab manager, if it's an academic science position, if it's an industry, what can, both sides do to make both sides get better at it. And, you know, I also think it's, you know, you have to remember you're in there working, but you also are there, it's a two-way street. So the mentor is hoping that you will help them, and you are hoping they will help you. And if it all works well, that works very well. The postdoctoral trainee comes in, like I'll speak for Gary. I had him help teach students, and at first I think he thought I was being lazy. But afterwards he said, I realized what you were teaching me was how to deal with students and how sort of idiosyncratic they can be with all their different personalities, and how you get some motivated. I mean, each person has to be motivated a different way, and if you just have a rigid system, you will never get all your students or postdocs to work. I mean, everyone's different. And so he realized I had sort of method to my madness of giving him things to do to train him. I had him write fellowships, so he could write grants. Obviously, writing papers he was very good at. But again, all this idea of what can we do to help him, and I knew what he wanted to do, so I tried to give him things that I thought I could teach him, even if at times I think he was like, why are you making me run these students? Well, I'm telling you why. Yeah.
I have a question. So, we're talking about talking to the mentor about what you want, right? But don't you tell him this when you initially get the position, initially get the interview with this guy, or maybe in the very beginning of your postdoctoral
I mean, I do, but I don't know if everyone does. And I'm telling you, these are things that you need, if you've already been talked to, if your mentor's already talked to you about that, great. But I don't think that in every case that always happens, that someone's looking for a post, like put an advertisement up, you happen to get a job because at the end of your PhD, you know, you don't have a salary anymore. I mean, maybe you'll stay for a little while, it depends on what lab you're in. Some labs may keep you for a while, some may not have a lot of money. Some schools that your PhD is paid for by, say, the department and not the lab. You get your PhD, you're all happy for all the right reasons, but you no longer have a job. And honestly, I think some people you take the job and you worry about other things later. I mean, I do think mentors try, but I think when you start out as sort of your graduate career plus one, your first year as a postdoc, there's a lot of things swimming in your head. And you can't overdo it. I mean, you can overdo it like, well, I'm going to be a professor in 5 years, blah, blah. Well, I don't know if that's true, but you should at least be working with your mentor. And I know the first year is a learning experience. I mean, both sides are learning each other. Do we like each other? Do we work well together? Or I have no choice because I need a job and this is at least tolerable. I mean, there's anything in between, and I'm sure there's worse than that. But yeah, I think the mentor should talk about it, I think, as a student, but I'm not talking to the senior students right now, where I'd say, please ask the people you're interviewing with for these things, which I would tell, like Maciek is a senior student, wants to graduate in somewhere in the winter. He should graduate in January, February, somewhere in that range. And then maybe stay in the lab till summer or something like that. But I would tell him to interview and ask these questions, but I don't know if everyone does. So I'm just telling you, these are, I think, sort of responsibilities as the trainee that you have to take upon yourself. And I can say when I started, I didn't know that much about it. I was wide-eyed and naive. Everything was fine. I mean, like I said, the first guy I worked for wasn't a good mentor, but I took the positive. I learned important science. And, you know, not everything was well. Maybe if I had known things differently, I don't know how they would have turned out. You can't go back in time. But as I was there, I learned what I needed to do. And that's where I think having the second postdoc, at least in my case, worked out, because I'd sort of seen some things I didn't like to see. And so I was a little more aggressive in the context, or aggressive sounds like it's the wrong term, but I took the initiative to make sure that the next lab I was going in had the things that I wanted. And it worked out very well.
Well, that's okay. Go ahead.
Sorry. So, what questions you had in mind when you started applying for a faculty position?
I will get to that.
Oh.
I will gladly.
Speaking to.
I have lots of information about.
Speaking about the training, so let's say the person gets the postdoctoral position, and the person, idealistic, after grad school, has in mind, I'm going to be a scientist, and the person works. You know, maybe the environment is not the best. Maybe just the science seems like a boring thing. But after 2 years of postdoc, the person realizes, I don't really want to do the science anymore. I mean, this particular academic research, deep research science. And I want to lean towards industry, or I don't know, teaching. And the mentor says, I can do anything about it. I mean, I cannot teach you this.
Well,
and
again, that's part of the...
What about the changing postdoctoral position?
I mean, I did 2 different postdocs. I mean, I left the lab.
You sort of, as far as I understand, you left the lab because you didn't get along well.
That is true.
Well, if everything's fine except that you feel that you don't grow anywhere in the lab.
Well, again, that's where you need, again, you got to talk to the mentor, see what they get. If the mentor says, nothing I can do, then you maybe are at a crossroads. Maybe you have to leave the lab. There are opportunities that I would be surprised if most mentors wouldn't care. Like, for instance, you're in my lab, you maybe want to teach. And if you could teach in the evening, or you said you make up any day classes, that maybe you get like an instructorship at LSUS to teach some lectures, that would not bother me. Now, obviously, if it took away from what I thought was, quote, your workout in my lab, as far as your time in the lab, then, you know, I would try to come up with a solution for that. But, you know, if you were in my lab and your interest was, I really want to teach. Like Gretchen, the student that was a student, she wanted to go to a small teaching college. Actually, some of the same schools that you have been applying at. She's got a whole bunch of those in the Northeast. That are the small liberal arts colleges. They have sent me the little forms with stuff, and you know, she has done it at UNC. Obviously, she didn't do it here because she was a graduate student, but she's been doing some teaching. She's asked some of the faculty to teach. I know it's not as easy here because we don't have undergraduates. That makes it difficult in that scenario. And I don't know what LSUS has, but I have been told there could be some opportunities. Again, that's just hearsay. I have not ever checked with LSUS. I'm sure I could if someone had asked me, if you were in my lab and said, "We're going to do that." I could certainly ask some of the people and said, "Is there opportunity for, you know, a PhD scientist in my lab who wants to teach to come over and teach some classes?" And if we could work some out, and you said, "Look, I have to teach from 8 to 10 on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'll come in after that, and I'll stay late," I would be fine. I would not care in the context that I'm paying you and you're helping me. I want to help you in return, and I can only speak for myself. I've always been very flexible with things like that. I never cared. Obviously, if I'm paying you, and I don't mean to be bad about it, but the reality is, if you're being paid by me, you at least have to do, you know, the work that I'm asking you to do. But I don't think that, I mean, some I know would be rigid, absolutely not. And that's a decision you would have to make as a postdoc. And that's the benefit you do have is you can walk. I mean, you can give them the appropriate notice and you can leave. You're not tied down like a student who is stuck in that lab till they get a PhD, or they quit and they get a master's and they have to start all over again, or with a PhD. But we know that if you go through 4 years of the master's, you're not starting, you don't get to 1 year of a PhD.
That's right.
You're going to start over and it's going to take you 4 more years. So these are things that you need to work out, and it's okay to change. I mean, if you're not happy, you don't want to be an academic scientist, that's what you thought you wanted to be, there's nothing wrong with that. I think you should work, and I can only speak for myself. I know not all would be the same, but I think many would be. You just got to be honest with it. That's what I want you to take home, is that, so look, I just know I'm not going to be an academic professor. I've realized it's not what I want. You know, what do you think? And, you know, you hope they can come up with something. Maybe it's something you got to think about a little bit more. Maybe you need to go out and have a beer and think about it a little bit. But what would make you happy? Because eventually you're going to have to get a job somewhere. Like I said, if it's a teaching college, there's nothing wrong with that. And my feelings aren't hurt if my trainees do not become academic professors. Because it's not my job to tell them what to do. My job is to give them the best training, whether it's a graduate student or a postdoc, to make them have success in the future, whether it's a teaching college, whether it's a patent law, whether it's a professorship, whether it's scientific writing, going through my various trainees. It doesn't bother me. I'm happy for them because it's not me. So, I mean, in the sense that I did what I want to do, they should do what they want to do. And my job is to facilitate that. And that's why I said it's a two-way street. As long as you both are working towards the common goal. I mean, it'd be one thing if you just obviously never showed up and said, I'm going to stop teaching, and they're like, well, then you're not going to do it. I mean, then you could see where that would be a problem on both sides. But those are extreme examples of things. And I don't think, I mean, since I've been here, there's been clear examples of grad students that have been, treated like cattle as well as postdocs. I've seen it, I saw it at UNC in some of the huge labs. You were just a dime a dozen. They had 10 postdocs, you didn't like it. I got 10 more who have applied. And, if you're in a situation like that, you know what you're in. I mean, they got 10, 15, 20 postdocs, you're just one of the many, it is what it is. But I don't think anything changes about this idea that I've talked about. You may have less communication with them if they have 20 postdocs because they have probably 10 grants and they're probably the National Academy of Science or Howard Hughes and have a lot of money and are really busy, but doesn't change the fact that in most cases people still want you to be successful. They might not have a lot of time for you, but it doesn't mean they don't want to be successful. So those are sort of, again, just sort of my feelings as sort of what the mentor and the postdoc do. I got some other things just to tell you, and I know everyone wants about a job, and I'll really cover that. I think a couple things I thought I was thinking about, what are your rights? I mean, I know that a student's very structured. You apply, you send your 10 bucks and or 15 bucks and whatever it is here at LSU, and if you come for an interview, and if you accept it, it's very structured. You have classes that you have to take in your first year and your second year, and this and that. As a postdoc, it's just, go to a postdoc. Okay, what do? You apply, you start working there, and it's just all based in the lab, and I know that. And that's why I was harping on a lot of taking the initiative. But at least I think in the big picture rights, what you have to remember is, one, I brought some of these up, it is the mentor's lab, so you have to follow his or her rules. And that's just the way it is. You can be fired, as we've talked, but you can also have the right, if you don't like it, you can leave. I didn't like it, I can leave. Simply give the notice, I can look for a job, and I can leave. So it goes both ways, it's good. I think you should also always know the policies of school, sick leave, vacation, maternity, etc., because those occasionally come into play. It can be problematic if you don't know. I think if you have a good mentor, they can find solutions to that. I mean, at LSU, to my knowledge, you guys have 2 weeks sick leave and 2 weeks vacation. Non-negotiable, you can't save it in theory. Again, if you had a good mentor, maybe they wouldn't care. I didn't write down when Gary took time off, I never even looked. He said, I'm gone. I said, okay, I'll see you when you get back. But others are different. I can guarantee you, I've been here, there are people that checked off that Frederick took 11 days. If he takes one more day, I'm not going to pay him. You went 1 day over, I will dock your pay. And that is the rule. But you just have to know that. And I'm not saying everyone does that. I don't know if any of your mentors would do that. You tell me, I don't want to know. If it's a problem, I'll gladly help what we can do to solve that. But the reality is, try to know the policy. And it comes up with sick and vacation. And really, I think for the women, it comes up with maternity leave, because that become a big problem, depending on how it's all handled. I mean, students have the same thing. I had a student in my lab who was pregnant. In theory, she only had 2 weeks sick leave, and I guess 2 weeks vacation, and she could use it all up. And after that, by the graduate policy, I'd have to pay her. Now, I wrote a letter to the school saying she was, quote, working at home. That's not binding. If the school caught me, they could make me not pay her, but at least I had in the record that if anyone said she was working from home. And to Emily's credit, for anyone who knows Emily in my lab, she actually is working on a proposal because she has an NIH grant due to present to an outside person in December 7th. So she really did have to work, and she did in fact work, and I learned a lot about her as a student, how dedicated she is, because she was working from home, and she didn't just send me crap. I mean, she sent me legitimate scientific documents. So there are ways to do that. My wife, when she was first here, the first kid, was, I think, considered a postdoc at the time. She's now a faculty member of Micro. But, and John Sixby did the same thing for her. He said, look, you've worked for this long, you hardly took any time off. It's ludicrous that you only get 2 weeks. And obviously, So there are ways around it, but these are issues that I want, again, you take an issue to find out what the policy. And you may also want to know who you're working for. Some may be understanding, some may be letter of the law. And if you know that, it is what it is. But at least you won't have your feelings right. And I've also put, I know it's not, quote, a right like the rules of the school on maternity sick leave, but I think you guys should expect as a postdoc the right to be trained. I mean, I know it's not an inalienable right like a policy of how much time you have for sick, but you are a trainee. you're not just somebody working in the lab. I mean, maybe that's how it might feel sometimes, but I think you do have a right to be trained. That's something that I've always thought as when I was a trainee and now as a trainer, that, you know, as a mentor, that I've tried to train my people. And I think I've done the best I can do. And at least that's what I can talk about. A couple things you may not always hear about, and I'll get to your thing, is the next is when you guys are getting paid. So you guys get paid off of grants. Maybe your own grant was a little different, but one thing you never see as a student, you just go to work, get a salary, you never even think about where the money comes from. And I know as postdocs you get a raise, which is great, and I think, I don't know, most mentors would wish to give you as much money as they could. But understand that, and I say this because I've had, Gary understood because I train him a lot, but I know I've heard from others here where people, they want raises, I want raises, you want raises. That's absolutely expected. However, understand that NIH grants are flat. For anyone, I don't know if you've helped your mentor write a grant or not, but they're flat. It's whatever you get the same every year. And for mine, I get the most I can get out of an NIH grant, which is $250,000 a year. That doesn't change. It doesn't mean if graduate student salaries go up, I have to pay that at the same price. If supplies go up, I have to pay the same price. Your salary goes up, I have to pay that. Somewhere, something has to give. And I'm not trying to point this out to say why you should be screwed on your salaries. I'm not implying that at all, but just appreciate that, assuming you're getting a reasonable salary and your mentor's working with you, there sometimes becomes a wall where they just can't pay anymore. I know the NIH scale, was it 38 something, 39, 40, there does hit a wall because that NIH salary does, I mean, I don't get any extra money. Now what I've tried to do for my people is they can get their own grants. I will try to supplement as much as I can, because obviously if someone brings in $50,000, $40,000 a year on a fellowship, it's very easy for me to give 10 grand because I'm only paying 10. I'm not trying to be funny or anything like that, but I'm just saying, please understand it, because a lot of feelings get hurt. I've heard from both sides, being a student, as being a postdoc, and well, I want to raise, Well, damn right I want to raise. As a faculty member, I want to raise too. I know, and I've heard from the trainees about that. So try to understand, try to appreciate this. Doesn't mean you shouldn't communicate, shouldn't mean you shouldn't talk to them, but just understand that. And it gets back to trying to be honest and communicative with your mentor to avoid hard feelings on things that salary is one of those things that fries people's bottoms. Let's face it, everyone wants to make more. There's sometimes limits. I mean, I work for a state that doesn't give raises very often, that there's a lot of money crisis. So just appreciate those sort of things. And I bring that up because these are all issues I've seen as both as a postdoc, when I wanted raises, and when I finally learned this, I understood. And I did. I got 2 or 3 different fellowships, which paid me extra money when I was at UNC. And I encouraged Gary to get fellowships as well. And in our hands, it worked out fine. But there are realities to these things. Then the big thing I know you all want to hear about is how do you get a job? So that was a good way. Any other question?
Yeah, before you go there, I have a question. Regarding, okay, you said earlier, and I heard many faculty members say that, okay, the best time to be a scientist is when you're a postdoctoral fellow because you can pretty much do your work and all that. What do you think that mentors can sometimes load too much responsibility on postdocs, meaning like teaching, like mentoring a student in the lab or something that can take away valuable time from actually doing the real science? Do you think that can be a problem sometimes?
Well, I mean, it's very clear that you can burden someone with stuff that's not, quote, getting your own work done. Absolutely. But equally, as I talked about in sort of joking about myself, that there was method to my madness, at a level, if you want to be someone who, whether you're in industry or a small teaching college or an academic scientist, you're going to have people under you you have to train and get to work with. So there is a benefit to being the person in the lab that works with some of the students. I mean, I can speak for myself. You know, I think I was a good scientist. As a bench scientist, I did very well, did great at UNC, got a number of good findings and papers, but I no longer do bench science. Not that I don't like it, I have no time. I'm literally, there are 2 butt prints, cheeks, in my chair where I sit because that's all I get to do. I review papers, I'm the editorial board of JV, I get, I don't know, half a dozen papers every month. I'm a permanent member of NIH, and that's what I do. My students and postdocs have been successful. I have papers on my desk I read. I just don't have time to be in the lab. So the person in the lab, in theory, if they're good and are at the level they can train, is the point person for, hey, you've got that experiment to work. Can you help me? I mean, honestly, Gary comes talks to me. If a student comes talking about siRNA, I can tell you how they work. I can tell you what to do, but I don't know the concentration he used, that he found the optimal one under monocytes that were freshly isolated versus monocytes that one day. Now, I have it in the protocol that he gave me, but he has the nuances of what works, and he should, because he's the one doing the experiment. So, like with all things, there's a bell curve. There's probably too little training. There's probably too much training in the context of making you do everything. And somewhere in between is the happy medium. And that gets at part of, this communication. If you feel you're doing too much, talk to your mentor. Your mentor might feel you're not doing enough. And maybe you'll see both sides. I mean, I've told my people all the time, when we talked about things that I thought were problems, and I said, look, if you think I've spoken crack, go back and think tonight, let's discuss it tomorrow. I mean, if you feel that my criticisms are valid, come back and tell me. If you feel they're not valid, let's talk about it. And I tell them all to look in the mirror. And I tell myself the same thing. I mean, when I talk to them and they go, well, I couldn't possibly done that, I go, look in the mirror and tell me. And almost all the time they come back and go, you're right. I'm not always right. I don't mean that I'm always right, but a lot of times in concerns I've had for student or postdocs, issues that were my observations, we discussed those. And they work out. I can't speak for everyone. Some are not, people are clearly not very good at that. That's life. It is what it is. But it's something that you need to discuss. And if it's not what you can do, you either have to find a solution to it or you have to leave. I mean, unfortunately, that's the outcome. You suck it up, for good or bad. Obviously, it's good. You're not going to suck it up. If it's bad, you got to suck it up. If the rest is good, and you do that. Because if you get someone who's training you well, you get a lifetime friend and colleague who's going to write a lot of letters. I mean, I wrote Gary 50 letters for jobs. And I called up everybody that he applied and I knew and said, you got to hire this dude. And I guarantee I'll write letters when he goes up for tenure. Obviously, I hope nothing happens to me, so nothing happens to him, that I'll be able to do that. I'll likely write letters when he goes up to full professor. Hopefully make that far. I mean, my graduate advisor wrote letters for my postdoc, for my faculty position, for my tenure, for assistant to associate, and for my full professor. So this guy saw me go from just a young, looking like you with blonde hair and full head of hair to a guy that it all fell out, somewhere between assistant to associate. And I'm not saying that was a fault of any postdoc or student. I think it's natural, but maybe not. But he wrote letters the entire time. And my postdoctoral advisor, at least the one that I got along with, wrote letters for faculty, for assistant to associate, for tenure, and for full professor. So, we do, if you have a good relationship, we do a lot for the trainee, again, assuming that, and you have to, I guess in the big picture, ask, if they're doing a lot for you, they may expect a lot from you. And you got to ask, is that what you want? And I mean, I expected a lot from Gary, but we sent him all over, went to many meetings. He got premier talks picked. He got a great project. We discussed with him, was moving in the job, about taking a project with him. I was very careful about saying, now that I got my grant refunded, you helped that. Let's take some of the work you've done that was in that, and let's angle the project to something that you can take with you. Because I said, be foolish. It does me no purpose to have trainees that I compete against. And because I'm not going to get trainees anymore. And two, I want them to be successful. So, in that case, I expected a lot from him, but he, I think, expected a lot from me. And I was, we talked about projects. I let him do his own thing, to take something with him. I mean, literally, I said, this is an area, and he developed it. Obviously, I gave him ideas. I mean, I didn't just say, you have to find something in your off time, but he worked on it. He's got the papers on my desk. It's probably the last paper we'll have with me, but it's the elements of the project that he is taking with him, or in fact is obviously starting to work on it, is getting his lab set up. So you got to balance those things, and I can't speak for anyone here. I can only speak for myself, what I did, and myself, what I expect out of mine, what that balance is. And you have to ask yourself those questions. and go from there. All right, so I'm sure what everyone wants to know is, how do you get a job? What do you need to do? And some of this gets back to what you want out of, which at the very beginning, what do you want out of this? You're a postdoc, all you postdoctoral fellows, assume everyone here's a postdoc, right?
No.
No? You're a graduate student? That's right. Yeah, but you'll soon be one postdoctoral fellow. You're just getting ahead of the game. But part of this gets back to what do you want? So if you want to be a faculty member, this is where it makes a difference. There's a couple things you need to do. You obviously talk to your mentor, learn things about it. I think what Michael has done is a good example. So is currently here, done it the right way. He's also made friends of other faculty members, because we have to write letters of reference. And Gary did it very well as well. I mean, he had in our department, Lindsay Fletcher, and then the chairman O'Callahan write letters. Because he needs 3 letters from here, and he got letters from, or sometimes 4 letters. He got a letter from his graduate advisor at University of Alberta and University of Edmonton, University of Alberta, in Edmonton. So he got letters. But by knowing other faculty, because if I write a letter and it's just half a page saying, I played soccer with this guy and he seemed smart, and I'm just being facetious about it because I wouldn't write that, but that's obviously not going to get you a job. If I write a letter that says, I've seen Michael a couple of times in our Center for Molecular Referral, I'm not going to get a job. I write a 2 to 3 page letter for anyone that I'm going to take. It takes time to write a letter like that. That's good, not just bullshit. I'm not advocating myself. I'm just saying it takes time to do that. And you can, by cultivating a relationship, a friendship, and seeing that person in action. In Michael's case, it's easy because he was working with a faculty member of our department. And now someone, although Karen's not in physiology, not in our department, but she's certainly in our Center for Molecular Virology. We see him all the time. He would collaborate on the paper with Stokes and all the Eastern Europeans on there, and so it made it very easy for me to write a letter stating how I know Michael, we've collaborated, why I'm a good judge of each of these characteristics. And so this gets back at getting a job at the early steps of preparing yourself, making sure you know other faculty. I don't mean brown nosing them, so to speak, but talking to them. You have lab meetings, you have group things. Get to know them as more than just another faculty member, as a colleague, and hopefully from there. Talk to your mentor and other faculty colleagues at the university about what you want to do, how you're going to do it. So in Michael's case, at least what you're applying for is teaching colleges so far. And Gary wanted to go, the bigger sort of academic institutes that had bona fide research. And, he talked to people, asked, and got big picture ideas how to do it. Now, again, everything about this, it's your career. If I'm the mentor, ultimately I can look at it selfishly, you get me papers. And that's great. And I will write you letters. But ultimately, my career is already established in the context, I've got some grants, people in the field know me. It's your career that you have to take, again, what I say, to take the bull by the horn. So keep remembering that it's you have to take the initiative. So you want to get a job, you got to take the initiative in regards to talking to your mentor, talking to other colleagues, and even in how you do that. And at least for, and I did say, I wrote here, if it's a supportive mentor, it's very easy to think about things. If you have an unsupportive mentor, that becomes more problematic, but I think you can overcome that if you have made other colleagues who are friends that you can talk to and at least get advice for it. Sometimes I suppose you can complain to them about your mentor. Sometimes that might not be as wise because they may know them too. Other times, like I tell anyone who ever talks to me, I say, as long as you're not making up data or threatening doing any crime, I don't care what you say about other people. I won't say anything to them. Obviously, you're making up data, then I'm going to say that if you're going to commit a crime, I'm going to have to say something. But if you said, I don't like this guy I'm working for, I'm like, that's fine. I mean, I'll tell you my opinion. I won't tell him that, unless, like I said, you're doing something that's obviously illegal. Okay, with that stated, so what do you do to get a job? Well, at least for everything that I've done, I think the place to start is, and this is part of the initiative, you got to look and see. Everyone knows the journal Science. Science has a fantastic, at the back of it comes out every week, In the back of it, there's about 50 pages sometimes of jobs, from postdoc jobs to faculty jobs to teaching jobs to industry jobs. There's a buttload of jobs in that. You can look at Nature has some, depending on your specialty. For our discipline, American Society of Microbiology has a job. Some in the hard copies, they have websites. Obviously websites are a little more modern, but you can get a hard copy of science. A lot of people still do, the library does, and just Xerox the ones you want. Or you can download it from the science website. AAAS has that. Again, for our discipline, American Society of Virology has website listings. Oftentimes, places will send jobs, like I get them all the time, looking, in most cases, herpes virologists, but I get job postings all the time, colleagues looking, we're hiring viral immunologists, etc. And, that's a good way to look at that. If you go to meetings, ask people, talk to people. I mean, this is part of the initiative that you have to take, at least at that level. And that's, as far as, that's the only advice I can say for that, because that has worked for me, it worked for Gary. Is look at these things, Xerox them, print them out, and give them to your references and do it. And other than that, if you have contacts or colleagues that know things, like if you have a friend at a company that's where you want to work, obviously take advantage of that. And things like that. I can't help you too much on, I don't know what's opening at GlaxoSmithKline in the Research Triangle Park. When I was working there, we used to get the ads all the time. I do not have those ads. I mean, they just would be up on the flyers and the wall and in the cancer center that I worked in would have all job postings they send to the director and stuff. But nevertheless, you can find those. And a lot of those, they post those in Science, in Nature, and ASM, and ASV, and whatever is the appropriate, I'm sure AAI would have them as well. So when you start looking, okay, let's say you found some things. Now, I can tell you I did it, Gary did it, and I'm sure Michael's going to do it, is you start off really slow, because you're a little tentative at first, and you find one or two that maybe want to be. And in Gary's case, he only thought he wanted to go to Canada, so he applied to the one in Canada. And, I didn't get any right away. But you really have to just basically, if you're going to go for it, you either because you hate the lab and you need to leave, or you like the lab and your time is up because you're ready, like Gary was, we had talked about it for a while. He's ready to be a faculty member. He was very good at basically, he had learned everything that I could teach him. The only benefit to me, the longer he stayed, the more papers I would get. But it would not have faulted me for wanting that, but as a mentor, that's not what I want to do. I didn't want to keep him just because I could. He needed to be free. My scientific son was free. But you have to write letters. You have to write a lot of them. We must have written about 50 letters. And I bet that's how many I did. So it hasn't changed much in 14, 15 years since I've done it. You gotta write a lot. It's a tough time now. Doesn't mean you won't get it, but it's a tough time. What you have to remember is the best person, you might be the best person for the job you're gonna get. You may not be the best person on paper for that job. Meaning that, for example, in Gary's case, he applied, in many cases, I bet he was a top on paper candidate for that job because he had a lot of papers. He had got his own funding at the time. He was well versed. He was a great speaker. But if he was applying for departments looking for an immunologist, he was a viral immunologist, more focused on a virus or cell biology. When he went to study upstate, they have a whole group of herpes virologists, and they were looking. They didn't have a beta herpes virus for anyone who cares. CMV is a beta herpes virus. It's a obviously herpes virus, and so he then didn't matter. Well, there are other people that applied. He was now clearly the best candidate for that job. Even other ones, I think he was probably the top candidate, but not on paper, but not necessarily for that job because it wasn't the discipline and expertise they wanted. Or maybe if they're looking for someone and you have like a table right here, you could imagine if we're all looking at a candidate and 10 people come in, we're going to have a lot of different views as to which guy or gal is number one. And if 4 out of vote for 1 and 3 vote for 3 and 2 and 1, the person with the 4 is going to win. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best person. It meant there's the person that those 4 who had the majority liked, assuming they all got past the screening and they were all equally good. So keep that in mind. It's one of the reasons why it's so important to think about writing a lot of letters. The other thing is, make sure you tailor each letter to what it is that you want. And that's a critical point. I mean, I can speak for myself. I was, having been trained as an immunologist, working in virology, I played myself up to whatever I needed. They were looking for an immunologist. I worked on monocytes. We were at the heart of monocyte biology. We were looking at a pathogen, how it upsets the function. If it's a virology, I could write whatever I wanted, because clearly CMV is a virus, and we said we were looking at virus stuff, and we were looking at dissemination. If it was viral immunologist, I said we're understanding how this pathogen upsets and upsets the immune response. But I did tailor each letter. I didn't make it BS-y, but I made sure if they're looking for something. I mean, you can see there's microbiologists in Department of Genetics, Department of Molecular Biology, and Microimmunology, and biochemistry departments. There's a whole host of these, and you have to sell yourself within reason. I mean, you can't make it up. If you've never done any biochemistry, I was not likely to get in the biochemistry department because I'm not doing biochemistry in my field. But there are plenty of virologists who are really biochemists. They could work in a biochemistry department, they could work in a microbiology department. They could clearly probably not go to an immunology department. But you have to be prepared to think about these things, because those letters say what they're looking for. And you want to play yourself up. And it's important that you do that. If you just send a generic letter, "Dear sir, I'm interested in your job," you know, you may not get it. I mean, if it's one like they're looking for, you know, the mad Russian who has worked on CMV and other, you know, and in the past of BSL-3 agents, then if that's what it says in the title, you might be able to get away with, "Hi, I'm Michael, and I'm applying for a job." But assuming they're not asking that, you know, think about your letters and tailor it. Tell them your disciplines, what you've worked on, your expertise, so they can see and go, "Oh, I think this is someone we want to bring in." You know, obviously you have references. So your mentor's going to write letters. You also have other reference people. So the other faculty colleagues, sit down and talk to them. Tell them what you want. They're going to write letters. Some of these people may also get phone calls if it goes farther. And you want them to be able to answer, hopefully the right way, what these people in the phone interview might be doing. With it as tight as it is now, they may call up all the references and say, "So what do you think about this guy? What do you think his interests are?" And if you don't know, you're like, "Well, shit, I don't know." I mean, that's not going to help the person you're trying to help. But you can't help them if you don't have that information. So I think it's really critical that you talk to them, you talk about your plans, your goals, your interests, maybe even give them a copy of your outlining thing that you wrote for those particular things, so they have it on paper and say, "Oh, okay," you know, because they may have a general idea of what you thought of, but maybe you wrote it very eloquently. Hopefully you had more time to think about it in a writing than when you verbally give it. That can help a lot, you know, and I think these are really critical elements to working and getting a job, because if you don't get good letters, it doesn't matter how good you are, you're not going to get a faculty position. And you need, all of them need to be good letters. And so it's really important you do that, and it's really important you get to know these people, and, you know, hopefully, you only do so much. You hope they write a good letter. And, you know, that's where we're at. I think when you're applying, make sure you talk to them, again, not only talk to them about your plans, but also give them a timeline. Like, would you be willing to serve as a reference? Yes, I would. Okay, great. You know, does that mean next month, next year, or whatever? Just let them know that I'm going to start applying for jobs, and, you know, I might apply a little at first and see where it goes, and I'm going to start applying a lot, and would that be okay? I mean, if you know that you're going to need letters in 2 weeks and are going on vacation, for 2 weeks, it's not going to help you very much. And so by giving them a timeline and a planning, you can allow them, and I'll speak for myself, as we get really busy and just writing a letter. I mean, I can whip off a quick letter in 10 minutes, but it's not going to tell you much. I know this person, I work with them, and I think they're good. But that's not what you want. You want a letter that says, I know the dates, when did I first meet Michael, how did I first meet him, he worked in the lab, how do we interact, have I seen him do things, I've seen him in journal clubs, I've seen him in all these things. I mean, his is a different example than others, I mean, but all the same, even if I've seen you in seminars or in presentations, those are things that I can write and will write, and I'll play up if I obviously want to help you get a job. I'm going to play all those things up, but these are all things that go into the letter that help. And so by giving them a timeline and when, it helps us, so at least we can plan to make sure they go in on time. Certainly provide them with a CV, all the job postings, or at least what I like, and one might be different. I like the CV. I mean, I know I can look up and plug my head, and that's easy enough to do. But I like to be able to say, where do you get these papers? Where did you get them? To highlight some things. The job postings. The job postings sometimes have some hints in there, what they're looking for. If the job posting says, is this we want to know if someone's a good teacher, it is very important for me to write that they're a good teacher. I mean, it might be less for me as a reference than maybe the mentor, but in Gretchen's case, she's applying like you are, but since I was one of her primary mentors, I wrote that in the 5-6 years I saw her in the lab, she was a great teacher, both in lab meetings and blah, blah, blah. I played it up with yours too, because I knew you were teaching colleges. But the point being, these are things that can help me as the person writing the reference if I see the job posting. And then you can do what you did, where you just email it to me. Some are downloadable docs or PDFs. You can send that to me, for example, or anyone to do that. And that works out very well. And then, like I said, give them time to write a letter. I know sometimes we all do this, and I've been guilty as anyone, waiting the last minute. And we'll all do that, and most of us will say, okay, we'll get it done. But the more advanced time you give us, the easier it is to not miss deadlines. Like if it's like, oh, by the way, I need this by Friday because I want to start a job search, and oh, okay, well, I'll try to hop right on that. But if you got a million things going on, someone's going to spend a late night doing it, and most people are willing to help, but I guess what I'm saying is, the happier you make the person writing a reference letter, the happier they're going to be to write it and write a good one. I'm not saying they won't. I mean, I would do it for anyone I thought was worthy of getting a good letter, whether I had to do it late at night or not. But nevertheless, I prefer not to have to do it that way. Let's see. If sometimes these places require hard copies. I don't know, Gary had a whole bunch that wanted a hard letter. It's a simple thing, but I know O'Callahan a couple of times called me about that. He goes, I want, if you're going to do this, he told me to tell Gary, he said, please have him give me an addressed envelope, one that's professionally done. Because Gary sometimes would handwrite, Dr. So-and-so chair, and it was all messy, and Dennis did not like that at all. I just sent it in, figured that's fine, but I agree with Dennis, it's more professional to get a very nice typed, if you have to do that, just give them the typed envelope. I mean, obviously we just put it in our mail and it goes sent out, but some of these are little things like that. Some are bigger issues, like, making sure you provide your reference with the information. And obviously the big part is, the first step has to be you have to take the initiative and start looking. And talk to friends, talk to colleagues, talk to your mentor, talk to other people. Maybe you don't know them very well, but sometimes you got to start somewhere. I mean, sometimes you're going to plop in someone's office and say, I'd like to talk. I mean, obviously ask if they have the time to do that before you just plop in case they have a deadline, but you know what I'm saying, that you just got to talk and say, look, I would like some advice. I know you've done this and this. I know we haven't seen each other much, but I think a lot of people would be happy to help. Anyway, I've gone on a long time, but I'd like to open the floor for questions. Do you have any things about that? If you have questions, not right now, but at a later time, you can stop by, you can email me, call me, or whatever, and I'll gladly help you more in any scenario that you want.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, from experience as a faculty member, since you participated in hiring other faculty members, what number of applicants per place are we talking about? Of course, approximately.
It does depend on discipline, and it depends on university. But you can get anywhere from dozens to hundreds.
Hundreds,
Hundreds
few
of
or
applicants.
quite a few?
What's that?
We're talking about 200s or 11?
Yeah, 200, 300, 400. I mean,
400.
and now you can appreciate why you have to apply so many times. And I can tell you, in Gary's case, some of the same people were interviewing at the same schools. It was a circuit. I mean, there were probably 5 or 6 people interviewing the exact same top schools because they were all the top sort of herpes virologists looking for a DNA virologist. And so the same 5 went there, same 5 went there, and obviously they had slightly different ones, but I guarantee you there would be a lecture, there would be a circuit if you were to look, and the same people would be going. Now, there's good to that. If you're all the top and there's 5 schools, hopefully one goes, one goes, and it all falls into place. It doesn't always work that way. I mean, if all of them want the same top candidate, a bunch of them are going to be number 2s, waiting for number 1, so to speak, to decide, and the other ones are going to go down the line, and you'll see where you go from there. But no, you can get a lot of candidates. I think for our virology positions, we're at least getting 50 to 100. And every school does it differently. But one of the places Gary applied at, they had 12 candidates they brought in.
Wow.
So they must have had hundreds of applications. They brought in the top 12, all done over 1 week. So it's 3 months to do this. And it's a long process. I mean, it'll take you a year to 2 years to get a job, assuming you're going to academics. Industry, they could say, hey, great, start in 2 weeks. What? They might be a little bit more interested in starting soon, but academics takes a long time, because unless you're just by chance only submitted one, you're talking to be the last candidate, and you have to be the best candidate, which, I mean, it could happen, but it's certainly rarer. Yeah.
So is it more critical, what is better if you can choose, when you look at the candidate, somebody who has like 10 publications and no funding, no grants, is it, or somebody who has funding and like 2 publications?
And that's sort of an extreme example there. And I don't know in that example of someone who had 2 papers as a postdoc brought a K99 in versus someone who had 10 papers and didn't have a K99. I don't know what they would, that's a really extreme example, but I can guarantee you if someone had a K99 and 6 or 7 papers, someone else had 10, they're going to take the person to K99. More likely. I won't say that's not to say always the case, because again, when we talked about, I think you may have stepped out, they are looking for the right candidate for that school. So if the person at K99 did not do what meshed well with the department, it doesn't really matter. Because they are looking for people that mesh well with the department. Obviously, our department, we have a lot of virologists. If you're looking for a virologist, we want someone who meshes with the other virologists, who can interact and we can work together, not necessarily collaborate like in grants, but that they can provide insight to our work and we can provide insight to their work. Because if it's someone who does something completely different, you're like, it sounds great, I don't know what to say. If there was an RNA virologist came in doing the biochemistry of how a polymerase chugs at a line, I can scientifically critique that, but the nuances of the biochemistry of that event is not my thing. I can tell you, so I don't think the control, it doesn't make sense, but so they look at different things, but ultimately they're looking at the best candidate, the best combination of candidate and a candidate that meshes the best with that department. And I will also say they are looking, and all those things come into play. Joking aside, if you're a jerk and someone has somehow found that out, they know that. You'd be surprised if they know. They'll call, if someone's at a school, they might call up that, someone in the lab next door. Hey, this guy's a postdoc in your neighbor's lab. What do you think about him? That guy's a jerk. Oh, okay. You might be silly, but these are things you're looking for, because you're going to give someone, there are only 2 chances if you're going to academics to correct them. You hire someone, and that is your first evaluation of them. And the only other way to get rid of them is not to give them tenure. And I'm not trying to be funny, but that's the reality. So if you hire someone who's a bad faculty member, even if they're smart, you only have 1 chance to get rid of them, is when they go for tenure. And so people look at these things. And I put all these things that there's a lot that goes in there. I don't want you to think it's just, I write my CV, I've got 20 papers, I'm looking pretty good, which you probably would be, and I should get a job. There's a lot that goes into it. There's what you have done, worked hard in the lab, which is everything we talked about at the beginning. Your responsibility to the mentor is to work hard to get these papers out and do that, because that allows the mentor and all the references to write you a letter. Look at, this guy has these papers, this gal has these papers, they've done these accomplishments. And it allows then the committee is going to evaluate you to say, this is what we have. Don't believe me, they're going to line them up and say, this guy's got 25 papers, this one has 22 papers, this one has 8. Take a look at that. And that will play an absolute role in the evaluation. It doesn't necessarily always mean the case. Just because someone has more doesn't make them better. But I can guarantee you that they will look into that.
So they're looking the quantity of papers, not quality.
I won't say that completely, but they clearly, I mean, when you look at a CV, there's a lot of papers they're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
They'll put you in a pile of the good candidates. Obviously, if someone else says, if you have 15 papers, someone had 8, but the 8 were in science, cell, and nature, they're going to obviously put that in the pile of ones they're going to look more serious on. So don't get me wrong, it's not an absolute number. It's a combination of number and quality. Obviously, in our field, if they were all in archives of virology, which is I had a really low impact factor, and you had 30 of them, you'd probably be well behind someone who had work in, say, the Journal of Virology and other, good tier journals. Because we're also evaluating you, and I'll speak for academic science, we're not just evaluating you on paper. So I got your CV, I'm looking, and I'm going, it's pretty good. But we're also evaluating you whether, one, you mesh with our department, and two, whether your project is fundable. I mean, you might be the nicest person in the history of the universe, you might have the best CV, but if your project sucks, at least by our definition, and we think you have no shot of getting funded, you're not going to be a good faculty member. Whether that's fair or not fair, it's the reality. Because the reality is, we need you, if you're going to come in as assistant professor in our department, that you get funded. Because if you don't, and you can't get it, and your project's due at the beginning, all we're going to do is waste money. And you're going to come in, you're going to uproot your life, you're going to go there, and then you're going to get fired. And I know some of the colder universities, like Harvard, that it's just a revolving door. We don't like it. Bye-bye. Because I got
Faculty?
Oh yeah, they don't give tenure until you're a full professor, and so you lose your grant. So you're gone. There's no. You got 1 year. Otherwise, you're fired. Why? Because they got 1,000 people. It's like the hot bar at night. Everyone's lining up in that red row. As soon as someone comes out, the next person goes in. They don't care. And that's great and it's bad depending on your point of view. But nevertheless, I mean, these are all things that go into it. So they do look at the CV. Absolutely. Number counts, not absolute. They can look at quality. And then they'll look, like I said, whether you mesh. Obviously, some of that they'll learn when they interview you, if you make it that far. Some they will learn, certainly from talking, for the letters of reference, discuss that, as well as calling people up. I mean, if I happen to know your boss, and even if I'm not on the search committee, I'm going to call your boss up and say, tell me a little about this person. Or, like I said, people call up. I've certainly heard this. They call up the lab next door that their friend's in, or the mentor. Tell me about this student or this postdoc. So all these things go into play. And then ultimately, they put the top 4 or 5 candidates, or up to 12, as I gave one example, and they invite for an interview. And then you go from there. Yeah.
That's the question. Okay, I got it. So you're talking about CV and reference. Just last question. What about this other things that they ask, like research interests, project? Well, that's important, but how detailed should it be? Should it be like a grant proposal? What about the teaching statement? How important it is, or it's just a generic letter?
Well, teaching college, the teaching statement's going to be pretty important, because they're going to ask whether they're going to evaluate whether you could be a teacher from that. I don't know, unless I was to see yours, I don't know what would be good or bad. But I can guarantee you they want to know sort of your philosophy on teaching, your experience with teaching, principles. I know most of us, if you've been a grad student and a postdoc, I don't know. I mean, what are your principles? I mean, how do you not say my principal teacher wants student to learn? But they want more than that. They want you to tell your experience. I have, obviously my goal is, to being a teacher, is to move knowledge, blah, 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 all the BSE stuff, but then to say, and I've done this by my experience, and play up the unique things. I mean, Luda was writing some things, and I told her to play up what she had from Russia and here, and how you've learned language, and how this has taught you the appreciation of teaching. And she said, why? I said, because that's what they want to hear. I said, you are who you are. She goes, is that going to hurt me then in Russian? I'm like, if it hurts you, you're screwed to begin with. So why not try to make it a strength? I mean, if they don't learn Russian, you're not going to get the job. But if you can play that up, then that's great. And in your case, I mean, if it's not, if there's nothing in your background in that scenario that helps you, it doesn't matter. And she told me some things, I said, that's what they want in there. Something about she taught in Russia, she did this, she learned that. I said, play that up, because that's part of who you are as a teacher. And, and so that's what they want. The research plan, again, they do want to know, what have you done? How is the work? It basically like a little first page of a grant. I mean, they want to know, what are you going to do? Because it gets at the heart of, is your project fundable? And do we want to bring you in? Obviously, we'll learn more if you interview. I mean, you will present it, and people ask questions. And Mike, what are you going to do? What about this? What about this? They might make you do a chalk talk. They might bring you back again for more detailed chalk talk. We did that with all of our recent assistant professor hirings. They came back, gave a chalk talk. They gave the overall ideas of the grant, the hypothesis, the aims, and sub-aims. We asked them questions. What about this? Is that a concern? And so you do have a chance to explain that, but you have to get through, you got to get in the door. Mm-hmm. Getting in the door is your CV, your references, and then these other documents you write, your teaching, your research plan, etc. Make them detailed. Give them to people to read. I mean, give them to lots of people. Give them to other new assistant professors that maybe you have seen in your departments or things, and say, what did you guys do? I mean, maybe they didn't have that. So that maybe that would help them. But if they have, maybe they have some stuff that they can show you or give you some ideas. And I think the more you get help, the more you see and look and talk to people, the better off you are. It's a lot about networking and sort of following a trail. That even though each person's trail is different, everyone who's got a faculty member position, at least from a postdoc, all had to have a similar trail. I mean, they all had to write letters. They had to apply for jobs. They had to get letters of references. They had to send a CV in. They had to have a teaching thing or a research plan, or combinations thereof. So, was that? Anyone else have any questions? If you do have any questions afterwards, you can I'll gladly tell you more if you have anything, or if you go back and you think about it, and a year later you're like, about my time, I need to go find that dude and see what he told me. I'll be more than happy to help you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.